Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Well, hello, Julie. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. It's my pleasure. Thank you for indulging me and letting me interview you. So I spent a lot of time looking up your background, and there's a lot of different areas that you work in. How do you describe yourself and what it is you do, given all the things that you are currently working on?
Well, if you Google me, it would look like I'm working on a lot of things, but that's not necessarily present tense. I've done a lot of things. I like to kind of take a look at my life all the time and go, okay, what's my ideal day look like? Like, what kind of work do I want to be doing? Who do I want to be helping? And I'm always just pivoting a little bit to move a little closer to whatever I think my ideal day is. And it also changes as life changes. But kind of describing myself, my background is real estate. I have an MBA in real estate and finance, and I worked as a real estate investor and ran a real estate training and education company for many years in Canada. So when you Google me, you see a ton of real estate stuff. And through that, I also wrote my first book, which was called More Than Cash Flow. And it was a real estate investing guide for Canadians primarily, but, based in a lot of stories, kind of going against the hype. There's a lot of people just talk about all the money you can make in real estate. So I decided to share some of the real stories of what can happen as a real estate investor, like being the not so proud owners of a crack house and having a property manager who got charged with manslaughter and a tenant pulling a knife on another tenant. These kind of stories that the people who are selling you courses, they don't always warn you that when you buy a bunch of properties, you're going to get a bunch of stories.
Right.
So I wrote a book on that as part of my real estate journey. And so that was kind of, my first foray into the world of book writing. And over time, people started to come to me asking me questions about writing books, but also about how we built that real estate education and training company. So bit by bit, I kind of changed from real estate training over to more like branding and marketing and building a business. And I did that. I did some quite a bit of speaking around that and wrote a second book called The New Brand You. But through all that, I kind of kept thinking, I don't really want to be coaching people. I want to be doing something for them, because coaching's great. However, I wanted to, at the end of the day, people often want to learn, but then when it comes time to do it, they don't always do what they need to do. So I wanted to create a company that provides a service where we do as much of the work for you as possible so that I'm not feeling sad at the end of the day because I worked with someone who never put the stuff into action. Mm-hmm. So today I run a company called Book Launchers, and we help authors primarily focus on nonfiction. So entrepreneurs, sales professionals, people that have a service. We help them write, publish, and promote their nonfiction book. So that's what I do. We still have real estate back home in Canada. I've moved from Canada to Los Angeles. That's where I am now in California.
Okay.
But yeah, my focus is on book launchers, but we still have real estate. But yeah, if you Google me, it does look like I do a lot, but I'm only really focused on book launchers.
Okay, that makes sense. But because I did Google you, and yes, all of these. So everything you just touched on, I've got questions about, and they all did pop up. So that was going to be one of my first questions, whether or not you're doing these concurrently or, clearly, as you just described, it was kind of your evolution.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So what made you want to get into real estate investing and going to school for that in the early days?
when I was working in my very first job my first job was selling diapers and Kleenex and Kotex for Kimberly-Clark and Canada. And as much as it was really fun being a sales rep working for them, I kept thinking it's going to be a really long life of working for somebody else. So I started looking around to see what my options were. And at the time I was already planning to go back to school. And I kept thinking, okay, well, I'm going to be a student, so I won't be able to take on a side business. So it had to be something that was not requiring my full-time attention. And I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and real estate just kind of jumped out at me as something that I could get in place and have it generate some quote unquote passive income, which is a term I kind of make fun of now when it comes to real estate investing. It's really not passive, but that was my goal at the time, and to have my money working for me while I went to school. And that was the start. Was property 1 and 2, where I took my savings that were for school and I put them into my first couple of properties, partnering with my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, which was good fortune because that would have been messy otherwise.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So we partnered together on the first 2 properties, and then we both thought this is pretty good. Let's figure out a way to do more and carry on. And so that was kind of how we got started.
Oh, great. And was that you said that was in Canada, is that correct?
Yeah. Our first couple properties were in a city called Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, but we ended up buying in 6 different cities across Canada over the 16 years that we were very active. Like I said, we still hold real estate, but we're not that active in purchasing now.
Oh, sure. So then, as you evolved, what made you decide to want to start writing about that?
I've always wanted to be a writer. Truthfully, if it wasn't for a high school teacher who gave me bad grades in English, in high school English, I probably would have pursued, that, and people tell you writers make no money. So The combination of thinking I would be poor and actually thinking I sucked at writing defeated me. But as a child, I wrote lots of short stories. I actually had all these little stories published in some papers in Canada and once some essay contests. So I always loved to write. So as soon as I had a reason to write, which was sharing lessons and stories that would help other people avoid the mistakes and the disasters we went through, I started writing immediately because I had a reason to pick up this craft that I actually always loved to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good, great. And then, so with your first book then, how did you get it published? Was it a self-published book, or how did that first process go?
Yeah, it's a bit of a story. The short answer is initially I really thought I needed to work with a traditional publisher. And so my platform in Canada had started to evolve, and I started to go back and forth with a couple different publishers and got really close to a book deal with one of them. Mm-hmm. And in the end, I didn't get the deal, which devastated me at the time. But looking back, I think it was really a gift to not get it for a couple of reasons. One is that some of my colleagues who at the same time actually did get book deals, a couple of them ended up buying back their book because one thing a lot of people don't realize is a lot of contracts with publishers, especially in the nonfiction world, they own the content that goes into that book. So if you want to sell courses, you want to evolve a whole platform of services and business that incorporates that material that goes into that book, you actually are limited in what you can do because the publisher owns that content. So one of my friends bought his book back, basically paid the publisher to now own the rights to his book. Mm-hmm. Other people have been, have run into the issue where the publisher decides to republish their book under somebody else's name. So they decide that your book was not marketable under your name, but we've got somebody else who will market it better. And this actually happened to one of my friends. And this is some of the things that can happen with the traditional publisher. So, and a lot of people think that the traditional publisher offers you a lot, but really you still have to do the marketing. So mm-hmm. The one advantage is it's much easier to get distribution when you're with a traditional publisher, but they take the royalties. Even if you get an advance, that's just an advance on your royalties. So you get paid very, very little per book, and you're still expected to be the one that does all the work to sell it. So it really depends on who you are and what your goals are.
Okay.
Traditional publishing may not make sense. For me, I was kind of forced into self-publishing because I didn't get the traditional publishing deal. But in the end, I mean, I made way more self-publishing than I ever would have made from working with a publisher. And I learned a lot more, and still I controlled it. So I was able to sell $2,000 weekend workshops with the same material that was in my book because I owned it and could do whatever I wanted going forward with the material.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, that's great. And I had no idea that they could actually republish your book under someone else's name. That sounds crazy to me.
Well, it depends on your contract. So a lot of people, I mean, if you're ever negotiating a contract, make sure you've got an agent that represents you. Because I think that some of my colleagues didn't necessarily have representation. They were just so darn excited to have a traditional publisher, right? And again, an agent will take money out of, so you're distributing money because your agent's going to take money. But yeah, I mean, if you're big enough that you're negotiating with a big publisher, you really need to have somebody who's reading that contract and making sure that you're not giving up stuff that you don't want. I mean, audiobook, international rights, these are all things that you want to make sure you're considering, because as a self-publisher, you own it all. But if you're working with anybody else, you got to read the fine print really carefully and make sure it's actually something that's good for you.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So then the next book you wrote, the Build Your Brand Toolkit, and then you started getting into advising people on their brands. What made you decide to make that switch from real estate into branding?
Two things. One is people, that's really what I was teaching people. So my husband was kind of the money guy. So he would help people figure out the numbers of the deal, and I would help them build their brand so they could attract capital, attract the deals, negotiate the best deals. So I was always coaching people on that sales and branding side anyway, while my husband was running them through the numbers because he was a mortgage broker once upon a time. So what actually happened was we were having a conversation 5 years ago now, and he was working on a commercial deal that I was like, we don't need this property. And it fell through. And I said, well, why were you working on it anyways? And it came out that he was bored. He said, well, I got to do something. So what am I going to do? And so I said to him, I said, well, listen, what would you do? Take money off the table. So don't worry about what you can make money doing. Just what would you like to do? And he said, well, I'd love to be an actor or a musician or play in a rock band, I think is actually what he said. And I said, okay, well, I've heard you sing and you don't play an instrument. So maybe the rock band isn't going to happen, but maybe acting. So I kind of, we just sat with it for a minute, and he said, well, what should I do? And I said, well, you could always just take a class and see if you like it. And so we did, and it turns out he loves acting. And so from that day forward, he started to pursue a career as an actor, which is why we're now in Los Angeles. But, so he slowly removed himself from our real estate coaching business. And so I didn't want to coach people on the numbers side of the business. So I basically just dropped the numbers side and focused on helping people with the sales and marketing and negotiation, which opened the door to work with people other than just real estate investors, and help them build their brands and their businesses. So that was kind of the evolution of that piece.
Okay, sure. So what would you tell someone if they came to you and they said, I'm terrible at sales and I can't sell anything?
Well, it depends why they're selling and what they're trying to sell, because sometimes, if you're trying to sell something you don't believe in, and that goes for yourself. If you don't believe in yourself and you're trying to sell yourself to somebody, the first thing you have to do is kind of fix that, is know your value and know the value of whatever it is you're offering. And if what you're offering is a good fit for the other person, then if you've built a brand and people know your value, first of all, you don't have to sell. People come to you and they're asking you to work with you. But the other thing is to just focus on fit, to always just be looking for that person that is a good fit, or that company. If you're in college, for example, and you're looking for your job, find a fit where you add value. You can solve the problem that person has. And an employer is just someone with a problem that needs a solution. So find that employer that you offer the perfect solution to. Find that client that has a problem that you can solve. And if you focus on finding fit and solving problems, then you're not selling.
Yeah, that's a really great way to describe it. I have not